Everybody hear me? Is this thing working? Awesome, thank you. Hope you guys are ready for what will be the best hour of your conference. I can't promise, but that's what I'm hoping for. All right, this presentation is titled Getting the Most Out of Property Manager. Really what we're going to do is go over some of the new features and functionality we've released in the past, talk about some of the best practices. Just as a structure, I'm going to go to the command line, actually Python tool, run some code. My colleague David over here is going to do some command line work with lots of real examples on the Wi-Fi. I think it's all going to work great. If it doesn't, just bear with us. Okay, that young photo on the left is me from about 8 years ago. It's the best photo I had. My name is Mark Van Horn. I am the Director of Software Engineering for configuration tooling at Akamai. So my teams own Property Manager, Edge Hostname Tool, CP Code Tool, Reporting Group Configuration, and a few more other ones. But mainly Property Manager is what I like to talk about the most. I was supposed to present with my colleague Ellen, who couldn't make it unfortunately. So we have somebody else that's going to present with us, David Makofske. He's a product architect, principal product architect, been with Akamai forever. I am also, like you, waiting to see how he does in the demo. Okay. What we really hope you get out of this is ideas. So we're going to show you a bunch of pieces, a bunch of building blocks. And I'm hoping you guys can come up with your own ways in your own businesses to piece them together and make your products more interesting and compelling. These are 3 real customer examples, 3 different customers that we have on our platform. After using some of the techniques that we're going to show you today, some of the APIs and the CLI tooling, how they have accelerated their updates. Specifically, the blue line is the activations with the API. The orange line is their activations with the UI. So you can see by integrating with the APIs, these businesses have changed the way they work with Akamai. They've really accelerated their updates with the APIs into their dev tool chain, perhaps. And it's awesome. This is what we love to see. All right. We'll get right into it. I'm going to jump into some Python now. The first thing I want to touch on is how to make a property, and then what a frozen format is. Okay? Okay. So I'm running everything through Jupyter with Python. This is applicable to any programming language that you guys want to use with the APIs. So the first thing is, do people know what the frozen formats are for PAPI rules? All right. Awesome. We're starting at a good spot. I like this. Okay. So, oh, that's not good. Let me run this again. Okay. We have rules that are part of Property Manager, and that's basically the things that you can add to your configurations. These are in the UI as behaviors. In the API, they're in the JSON structure. But we change them often. We improve them over time as new options become available. But we don't want to break your clients. So we have frozen copies of these rules. There's a point-in-time frozen copy. And they are labeled with the year and the month and the day that we have actually captured them. So the first thing you should know is if you want to use the API, we highly recommend using a frozen format. Now you could also use latest, which means you'll get the bleeding edge stuff, but your code will likely have to change over time more frequently than if you just chose a frozen format. Okay? We're about to cut another one. It's been a little while since we cut one. We're going to cut another one at the end of July. So to get this again, I'm showing you some of the API calls, but if you call the rule formats endpoint in PAPI, you can see all the available rule formats that you have. Okay, in addition, we have a client settings, your client settings, and it will give you the default for your client. And that can be updated using a put on the endpoint if you want to update it to a different frozen format. Okay, now I'm going to go through and create a PAPI config. So the first thing you might do here is call a products endpoint with your contract ID, and this will give you the products that you have on that contract. So you'll need this to create a property. You need to pick a product. So I go here, make this call, and then there's a structured output. Whoop. There's a structured output there that shows you all the products that are on that contract. These are all the allowed products you would be able to create. All right, so very dangerously here, I'm going to go in and try to create a new property. Okay, so I had to update the name because it would have a name conflict. Okay, success. Thankfully. So we got a 201 with the property link that was created, and then I go ahead and follow that link. And we can see here, this is the new property that has been created with the new property ID. So just to prove to you that that actually worked, here's that group prior to me making the call, and as I load this up, we'll see here I just made Pappy2. So it's a real property, showed up in the group where I placed it with the product that we chose. Okay, now because it's new, I need to get the ID. So we're going to go ahead and copy that. Oops. Okay. Now, I call this endpoint here to get version 1, and it will tell you the rule format that it was used to create it, and that's where that rule format is. So it's a very long way of showing you that when I created a new property from scratch, it used my default settings to create the rule format, use the rule format, and this is how you can interrogate where that rule format, which is that rule format, where it is. Okay. In addition, if you click on the property, and I'll just click on the one I created earlier today, and you look at a version of that property, oops, shrink this down a little bit. Okay. If the rule format is not latest, it will also appear in the UI. So if you go to look at this in the UI, it will be displayed there as well. Okay, so that was a word about rule formats. Okay. Now, in order to interact with the API, the Property Manager API, you need to pass JSON into the property version. So if you're going to do a put, if you're going to update the rule tree, then you need to use JSON. So we've added UI functionality to get that JSON more easily. So if I go ahead and flip back now to the UI, you'll see, oops, we have this View JSON button, which will give you the entire JSON for the whole property. Okay. And then in each rule, you can view just that rule tree's JSON. So this would be like the section of the config. So this is very helpful, I feel. You can cut and paste this into an IDE. You could bring it down as a file on your file system and then use that as, to construct the configuration. But this is a good way to get that JSON for the rule tree. In addition, you can also make a call to this rules endpoint. So now we're looking at the property ID / versions, then version 1, and now we're going to get the rules. And then that will be returned to your program in a JSON format as well. So these are nice ways to interact with the JSON. You'll need that if you're going to start making edits or pushing this into your build systems to make changes. You just edit the JSON, put it onto the property, and then activate. Okay. I'm going to talk about custom behaviors. I don't have a great demo for this, but I wanted to speak through them. For those of you that work with professional services, you might have advanced metadata in your configs. By design, this can't be edited by you. This can only be edited by us, by professional services. We have a way for them to go mark a block of advanced metadata as safe to reuse. We call that a custom behavior. Once that happens, you can reference it by ID and then use them in as many properties as you'd like across your account. This was necessary for us in terms of the DevOps automation, because if you can't do that, well, then you can't create new properties that look like the ones you have and go forward in a development pipeline. So if you're interested in this, if you have advanced metadata, not everybody does, but if you do, and you talk to your account team, they can mark it as safe, if it is, and then you can reuse that across your properties programmatically. I'm sorry, you speak up? That's correct, yes, great question. So the question was, when a custom behavior is cut and it gets a unique ID and a name, and that's how you would reference it in your configuration, you have to reuse that exact block of advanced metadata. However, what often happens is we will abstract out some of the data into a variable. And on Property Manager UI, there are user-defined variables. So if there's something like an ID number that you use internally, we can abstract that out, and then you can insert it for each config with a different value. But you still cannot edit them. You just reuse them across configs. Okay, the other thing I wanted to touch on before getting onto Edge host names is anybody still using Config Manager to edit configs? Oh, that is awesome. We've been trying to get rid of Config Manager for a few years. It's finally happening in July. So we are happy. In fact, we're phasing out the UI now. So certain customers that will see their config manager UI disappear in favor of the property manager UI. We have tooling in place to help with the conversion. You could also always migrate host names off of the config manager config, right to a property manager config. But it makes me very happy that nobody's using that tool. Property manager is where we're spending all of our time and energy, and that's where the best and latest metadata is. Okay. Also in the past year, we've made big improvements to our edge hostname tooling. Edge hostnames are what sit between your property, www.customer.com, and the Akamai ghost IPs. There's a part of that chain that you have to CNAME to. I'm sure you're all familiar if you've set up properties, that we call the edge hostname. So we've added a new UI for the edge hostnames. I'll show that to you now. Okay, so we have a new UI for edge hostnames, and in the UI, you're able to do things now like view details and edit. Okay. In addition, what I want to show you in a demo is editing via the API. So first, we have an endpoint here called Happy, the hostname API, v1 edge hostnames, and this will return simply a list of the edge hostnames on the account. It's long, so I have this kind of pretty printed in this way. But you'll see for each of the edge hostnames, it gives you some data about it, including the TTL of that edge hostname and which IP version it is. So in this case, this is an IPv4 only edge hostname. It has a TTL of 21,600 seconds. Okay. This is the same output, not pretty printed. So you can see why I had to go ahead and format that. Okay, you can also get the details for a single edge hostname. So in this case, I'm using one of the IDs from above. I'm getting details just about that one edge hostname. So you can see here there's a bunch of data, again, related to that edge hostname, which is this one here, 061318 v1 xmarkvh.com. Okay, now let's do something interesting. So let's say we decide we want to update this edge hostname to be dual stack. So you've changed your origin infrastructure. You're ready to take an IPv6, but you still want to allow clients to connect with both IPv4 and IPv6 stacks, TCP stacks. So we're going to update this edge hostname to dual stack, which you can do now, and we're going to lower the TTL so that the DNS infrastructure gets refreshed. This is done with the patch command, incidentally, which is kind of interesting. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and patch that. Ooh, I got an error. Not surprising. Let's see. Oh, my TTL is too low. Let's change this to 500. Okay, cool. So it's a 202, which means the record has been created. It gives me a bunch of information about that change. And now if I jump over to the UI, we'll see that in the pending change requests. So this is the edge hostname I just submitted. I added a comment that just says IP version. And now this is going out to the network, the live network. It will then be a dual stacked edge hostname. And again, you could do this to your own origin infrastructure when you're ready to change. This capability wasn't there last year. Okay, we also have the APIs for that, like I just showed you. That's all on developer.akamai.com, the documentation. Oh, one other thing, another public service announcement. Please use the correct edge hostname that we give you for the property. So there's certain things about that edge hostname that are optimized for the type of product and some other internal characteristics like the IP version. We know you don't have to use the exact right one. But if you do, it helps us. And it helps us, it helps you. So help me, help you, help me. Use the right edge hostname. We also added features around CP code self-service. So this is, CP codes are used in the billing and reporting infrastructure. Every property needs to have at least one CP code. You could have more. You could have as many as you like, up to some natural limits. We released both a dedicated API and a UI in order to interact with the CP codes. Okay. So first, I'll just get data about a specific CP code on the account. Again, this is a bunch of data related to the name of it, the ID, is it purgeable, which is a value that you can set, what contracts is associated with it, with products. Again, we could do some interesting stuff. Now we can edit some features of that edge hostname. So I will say we can change the name. So often you might have a CP code created years ago, 5 years ago, and it has something like 2010 holiday launch. It just doesn't make sense anymore as the name. So we've provided now a way to edit that through our APIs. Okay, so I go ahead there and I get a 200. It added a V1 to the end of the name. All right, probably not the most riveting demo you'll see today, but the functionality is real, it exists, and it is live. Okay, and I'll show you, this is the refresh UI. So again, now we have this nice new UI with filterable capabilities. And then at the very end here, we have the action pane where you could edit and view details. Okay. The last thing I want to talk about today is we've done some work in the last year to optimize the generated XML. So as you know, Ghost, our global servers, our global hosts rather, that are on the edge of the network, take your properties XML and execute that at the edge. So my team has been looking at ways to safely improve that XML. What we've seen is for properties that we have upgraded to the optimized XML, we've seen up to a 15% improvement in delivery times. And this is mostly related to the way that Ghost processes a request that comes into the edge and then needs to get run through the metadata. We're rolling this out this year. We're doing it slowly and safely to make sure that we don't break anything, quite frankly. As a customer, there's no way for you to know right now if you've been upgraded or not to the optimized format. One surefire way is if you create a new V1 property, it automatically carries it, because we're not worried about breaking anything. It's a new V1 of the property. We are considering releasing a little flag in the UI that says if it's been updated or not. But soon enough, this won't be optimized XML. It will just be the XML format. I wanted to bring it up just in case you're doing diffs between the XMLs. You will see them change over time, and it will get actually shorter and better. OK. Perfect. With that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, David.
Okay, can you hear me? Excellent. Why am I... What's that? Aha, there we go. All right, so today I want to talk to you about two things. One is a new toolkit that we've made available, and the other one is a new capability we've added to Property Manager API. Yep. Oh, yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Okay, so first I'm going to start with the Property Manager CLI. So the Property Manager CLI is available on GitHub. You can go to akamai.github.com. There are multiple there right now. You'll see that there's one called Property, and there's one called Property-Manager. The Property-Manager is the one you want. They have slightly different but overlapping functionality. We will be merging them together in the near future. And what I want to talk about specifically is one capability within the Property Manager CLI, which is something we call pipeline. So if you're in a scenario where you have tooling already for your website and you have a release process and you're automating things between the different environments, but you haven't done that yet for Akamai, pipeline is a tool that can help you with that. And so let's look at an example here where say you have properties that are for each configuration in your pipeline. So maybe you have a dev and a QA and a dub for your production. And today, if you're doing this, you're either doing it probably one of two ways. You're either going into the UI, and when you make a change, you have to make it to each individual configuration. So you're going to go in, you're going to change your dev configuration, you're going to push it, you're going to test it, and you're going to go in, you're going to modify your QA configuration, you're going to push it, you're going to test it. and again with the production. So you're sort of incrementally doing these changes over and over again, which is manual and error prone. Or maybe you've even automated it using Pappy, but you're basically bringing down the full JSON for each one of these and making the changes and then pushing it back up. So what we've created is an ability to actually source it from a single set of JSON and then apply the changes through variables through the different stages of your pipeline. So this will make a little more sense as I get into it here. So let's go into a demo. And as Mark said, I was a last-minute substitution here, so we are going to go live without a net here. All right. Let me step out of this. There we go. All right. Hopefully everyone can see that. Okay. So I've got nothing in this directory right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the Akamai CLI to create a pipeline. So let me just take you through really quickly what's here, because there's a whole lot of stuff. So this is just the CLI. This is the pipeline functionality. I'm asking it to create me a new pipeline. These are just my credentials that I'm using. This is the name of my pipeline. So I've named it davidm-pipeline-example.com. And in this case, you don't have to do this, but what I'm doing is I'm taking an existing property as a template. So this right here is I'm using an existing file that I have out there, which is in the UI right here. And I'm using that as a template for what I'm about to create. And then I'm just specifying what group to put it in. And then I've got basically the 3 different environments I want to create. So keeping it very simple here, a 3-stage pipeline, dev, QA, and dub for production. So I'm going to go ahead and kick that off. And what this is basically going to do is going to take the template config that I have, it's going to convert it to JSON, it's going to bring it all down. It's actually going to chop up the JSON, which I'll show you in a minute to make it more manageable. All right. So now I've got a directory here. I'm going to go into this directory. And I have a bunch of directories here. Let me take you through what I've created. So in the templates directory, I now have a bunch of JSON files. So instead of where Pappy was using one giant JSON to represent the entire configuration, this has chopped it up, which makes it easier. You can put these in source code control. You can do more granular management of who's editing these files. But basically what it's done is there's a main.json here, which is the default rules. And then any other rules that you've created and whatever you've named them, those have now been converted into JSON. So in this case, I had a rule for compression, I had a rule for dynamic content, I had a rule for static content, and I had a rule for performance. And all of that has been chopped up into separate JSON, so they can all be managed separately. Now I'm going to go in really quickly to the main JSON here. And what you'll see is, as you go through these different environments, you know that there are certain things that are going to change. You're going to have different host names, different CP codes with your different environments. So what it's actually done is it's taken the ones that we know you're going to have to variabilize, and it's created environment variables out of those. So you can see here the host name has an environment variable for host name. And if you look up CP code, you see that's also got a variable there. So if we go back up here, we have an environments directory. If we go into the environments directory, actually let me, there we go. You can see I now have directory for each of the environments I've told it to create. I've got a dev directory, a QA directory, and a dub directory. So if I go into the dev directory, I see I've got some files here, some JSON files. So this is where those variables are actually defined. So here is my host name, including the edge host name. And then also you can see here, I've also got an origin host name, a CP code, and a sure-out test object. So these are the things we know are going to change. So we've already variabilized them for you. And you can just go into these files and put in the values that you want for each of your environments. In this case, I'm going to fill these in really quickly with some values that I have. right, so once these things are variabilized, so I've got those for the dev environment. Now what I can do is there's a bunch of commands I can run here. So I can merge the pipeline for dev, which basically what it's going to do is going to take all of those snippets of the JSON, it's going to merge them together, it's going to substitute all the variables. So now if I go in and I look, in the dist directory, I see it's actually merged all that JSON and created one giant JSON file that Pappy can read for my dev environment. So you can see it's got dev dot my property. And so now that I've done that, oops. Now that I've done that, what I can do is I can also save it, which will save it to any changes that I make to that JSON to the dev environment. And I should actually also say here, let me just do this, let me update this. So when I go ahead and created it locally, it also created all of those properties for me in Property Manager. So here you can see I've got my dev version, I've got my QA version, and I've got my dev-to-dev version. So I can go ahead and save it. Oh. And that'll save any changes that I made. Actually, I didn't make any changes there, but if I do make changes, that'll save it, and then I can promote it. And so what I'm basically doing is I'm now, instead of the Property Manager and the UI being the source for all of my changes, all of my changes are being sourced locally. I can check these files into my source code control. I can make changes, and then I can promote them through the different different environments. So here's the promotion command. So if I go ahead and promote this, it'll take any changes I've made to dev, and I'm going to tell it to go ahead and push that to staging. And what you'll see is if I go in and take a look at the dev, yeah, there we go. I've got my activation. And so basically, this is a way to source everything locally. You can check it into your source code control, and you'll be using the same set of JSON to push through your different environments, so you minimize the number of manual changes, and you make sure you get the same code moving forward. And we should see here, this should be activating. Yes, activation pending. So this is going ahead and activating. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the enhancements we're going to do for this right now. Right now, this is entirely client-side, and we have some interesting enhancements going forward that's going to make it easier to interact with this with the UI. All right, so next, I want to just move forward and talk about bulk search and update. So, really quickly, by show of hands, how many people knew that we had added the ability to bulk search and update through Pappy before you came to Edge? Okay, couple of hands, 3 or 4, including Mark, who I don't think counts. How many people didn't know this until I just said it 30 seconds ago? Okay, most people, excellent. All right, so we definitely want to make sure that you understand this capability exists. So this is a very common problem we have. You have a lot of properties on Akamai. Maybe you have 10, or you have 20, or you have 100 properties on Akamai, and you have to do iterative changes to them. And so today you're going in and editing all these individual ones, whether you're doing it through the UI or whether you're doing it through Pappy. But there's sort of a lot of iterative work involved there. So we wanted to make that easier. And so we've extended Pappy And so let me show you what that looks like. Okay. So basically, we have these new endpoints for Pappy. So the first one I'm going to show you is rules search requests, and this is a synchronous version, so it's -sync. And so this is going to take as input just a basic search, and it's basically just going to say, show me across all the properties that I have every instance of an origin host name. And so let's execute that. And I'm using something called HTTP which is available with EdgeGrid plugin on the on developer.akamai.com. And so basically, this is just a way to issue HTTP requests, and it takes the auth type and the credentials right here. So I'm basically doing a post to this Pappy endpoint, and I'm going to take this input, this JSON search. We're using JSON path for this to specify the search. There's a lot of details on developer.akamai.com on how to construct those, the syntax of those searches. And there's a whole bunch of examples there too, as well of common searches. So I don't have time to go over the specific syntax today, but it's all on the website. So I issue this, and what I basically got a huge amount back because there's a ton of properties on this. There's about 50 properties. So I get all this information about these properties, but what I'm getting basically is, okay, they have an origin host name, and I find out information like, is it locked? Is it the latest version? Is it a secure version? What's the production status? What's the property ID, and so on. So now I want to refine my search a little bit. And so I'm going to try a slightly different search. And I'm going to look specifically, sorry, let me actually, before I execute this search, let me show you what it's actually looking for. All right, so in this case, I'm saying, give me all of my origin host names that have this specific origin. And I was nice enough to name this origin with a big old in it, so I know that it's an old origin. And those are the ones I'm looking for. And you can do this with any field in the Pappy JSON. So you can construct searches to look for values across all your properties for anything you want, which is much more powerful search than what we've had in the past. So let me execute that search. And what I get back now is I see that I've got only two properties that have that particular value in the origin. And that's these two. So let me go look at those. I have David M1 and David M2, ew2019.example.com. So let me go look at those in the UI. We do not have the bulk search accessible through the UI today. It's only through the API. But if that's something you're interested in, definitely let us know. All right, so here are these two. And if we go in, we can see that these, if we take a quick look at these, we look at version 2 of these. We can go right in, and we can see that indeed it has this origin with the -old. And so what I want to do now is I actually want to patch those, both of them. So I have a little patch command here, which is going to take those two properties, and it's going to replace those values of old with new. And so let me go ahead and execute that. Now in this case, I'm doing sort of a blind replace, but I could actually, with this, I can actually say, return results, and only apply this to whatever results return. In this case, I'm actually specifying the specific properties, but you don't have to. You can apply it to the output of the search. All right, so I've done that. This is a asynchronous call, and so basically I get this little thing back here where I can poll and find out what the results are. So let me go ahead and do that. So I'm just going to change this to a get, and put in that link. and it tells me it's already complete. So let me go back. And take another look. And sure enough, it has been changed to new. And if I go and check the other one, that'll be changed as well. Now, once you actually go and apply your change in bulk, you can actually go ahead and activate these in bulk as well. So I've got an activation as well. So let's take a look at that. And here's the code for that. I'm going to basically push both of these properties to staging. So I'm going to take that and push that in. And again, this is asynchronous, so it's accepted it. I've got a 202 accepted. I've got a link to check on status. I'll check that really quick. Whoops. User error. All right. So there we go. We basically have, it has an overall status for all of the activations, and then it also has status for the individual activations. So if I scroll up here, we have basically both of those, and they say in progress here. All right, so, and if I take a quick look here, let me go back to the property, we'll see that those have kicked off. In addition, and I think we're running a little late here, so I'm going to skip over this, but you can only, as you know, most of you probably know, when you push something to staging or production, it locks the version, so you can't change it anymore. So there's also ability to do a bulk create, and it'll basically create a new version. You can specify, I have some code here to do that, some JSON that'll do that, and basically you can bulk create new versions, and you just specify which version you want to copy from. So you can do that if the version that you want is locked. You can create a new version, then you can apply the batch updates. All right. So all the information about the bulk updates is available on developer.akamai.com. It's in the Pappy section. So if you go in there and look under Pappy and search for the word bulk, you'll be able to find that. There are synchronous versions of some of the calls, but for the most part, a lot of the calls here are asynchronous. So you basically, like you saw there, you're going to get back a link where you can poll for results. So really quickly, I want to talk about what's next. And I also want to mention, we've been trying to make sure we get feedback from all of you and people who are using this and what we want. We have been taking feedback on GitHub. There's ways on GitHub you can post feedback and questions. We do look through those. We've been trying to get some of those questions and requests into backlog and get those features done. So if you have feedback after Edge, please post it into GitHub for the Property Manager CLI. And of course, Mark and I will be here afterwards for any questions or feedback. The other thing that we've been looking at is this concept of a golden config. And so right now, basically, once you do this, you've moved entirely to a client side for the pipeline. Everything is done client side. Client side becomes definitive. But there are situations where people would rather edit in Property Manager and then bring that file down into the pipeline and then put it through the pipeline. And so we're working towards integration with the UI for the pipeline, and there's some things that we can do there. So we want to make sure that the UI is aware of the pipeline once you create it. You can actually have it be visible and visualize the pipeline in the UI once you've created it. You can lock and unlock it. So basically, if you go into the UI and try to make a change that would break your pipeline on the client side, you can lock it so it'll warn them and say, this is going to break your pipeline. So these are all things that we're looking at. And the idea, again, the idea of a golden config where you can have a template config, you can make all your changes there. We introduce a new variable type so you can do the variabilization in the UI and then pull it down into your pipeline. And so basically you can make changes in the UI. If they're complex changes and you don't want to mess with the JSON, you can do that. You can pull it into your pipeline and then progress it through the pipeline. All right, some related content and people for what we've talked about today. So as I said, Mark and I will be here to answer questions. There's also a lot of information about the CLI over at Launchpad if you haven't tried that. With the Launchpad, the hands-on labs and the mini hacks, there's CLI demos there, and you can talk to the dev relations team over there. Our product manager for Property Manager is Jay Sickland, who's here. Sid Fadkar is our property manager for CI/CD and DevOps. We also have been having every year a DevOps World Tour, which goes into a lot more detail and hands-on labs, actually allowing you to play around with this stuff. So if you get an opportunity to go to one of those, they're really, really good at getting your feet wet on this.